everybody. Welcome to Relationship Matters, another empowering conversation. I'm so excited. My very good friend, Gary Chupik, and his wife, Molly, here. And I have been known Gary for years, and by extension, Molly, but this is going to be the first longer conversation I've ever had with her and with Gary there. And it's just such an important conversation we're going to have. And I'm really hoping that you will be as empowered as I think you will be just by being able to spend some time with this couple. They're an amazing, amazing people, have done amazing stuff in this world. And so I just want to introduce you by way of bio right off the bat here. And so I'm going to just read that. So as I've already said, let me introduce you to Gary and Molly Chupik. They reside in Seattle, Washington, and they have 3 adult kids. Gary owns a leadership and mental performance company, and Molly is a homemaker and works part-time at a local nonprofit and works behind the scenes in Gary's business, doing admin and accounting. And if we're really honest, she's the brains behind everything. Gary loves sports, psychology, smoking meat, maybe smoked meat and making it yourself, and going on breakfast dates with Molly to their favorite country bakery once a week. And Molly loves her relationship with Jesus, long walks with Gary, and experiencing the gospel in every relationship. They both love being new grandparents and love spending time with their 1-year-old identical twins. That's amazing. Can you tell them apart yet?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
It took a while.
It took, yeah.
It did.
Yeah, I bet. They are quite the opposite in many ways. And Gary is an extrovert. Molly's an introvert. Gary likes to live fast and dream big. Molly likes to live slower and is very content. Molly has a passion for spiritual direction and spiritual formation, and Gary has a passion for making big things happen. But one thing that Gary and Molly have in common is being in a neurodiverse relationship. And we're going to explore that today. While Gary's brain is neurotypical, Molly perceives her world very differently and is on the autism spectrum, or what might be better known as Asperger's. That would make a very interesting relationship for sure. And the reason I wanted to have this conversation with you both is for that very reason, but more than that, just I believe that actually the neurodiverse relationships have got to be increasing more and more as the world has gone on in time here, and we see more and more people on the spectrum, or even with other like with mental illness as well comes into play. And I just think so many relationships are affected by all of that. And here you two are. How long have you been married now?
32 years.
32 years. And so somehow you guys have figured out a way to have a healthy and vibrant relationship. I mean, if you're going on dates to breakfast every week, you're doing something right there. So that's even just to start there would be awesome. But what I want to do today is just explore what a neurodiverse relationship looks like. And for those of you that are watching or listening to this, if you have friends that are in this situation, please, please, please make sure you share this out. Make sure you send this to them, because I know it's going to be helpful for sure. And so here we go. We're going to launch into it. Maybe we could start, Molly and Gary, just like, when did you meet? Where did you meet? Give us a bit of your story.
Well, we met in Eston, Saskatchewan, and we had a common friend named Donna, and Donna introduced us. And so I was the loud, obnoxious guy in Bible college. It was sort of my home turf, right? That was my territory in Saskatchewan. And Molly was the outsider from Seattle. And so this common friend said, Gary, you're loud and obnoxious. She knew Molly, who was quiet and introverted. And she said, hey, Gary, why don't you look after this girl? Just kind of keep an eye open for her. And so the story goes is that she certainly, most certainly kept an eye open for me, and has taken care of me all these years. So that's how we met.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. And you're still looking out for her.
Yeah, exactly. And she for me.
And I was going to say, in many ways, she's probably looked out
yeah.
for you more than another way around. Well, Molly, what did you think when you first met Gary? What was your first thoughts? Like, was it love at first sight, or?
Well, I think the funny part about it is that my mom actually met Gary before I did. my parents had come to visit me at the Bible school a couple weeks
Okay.
after I had gotten there, and my mom was talking to Gary because I don't know why, but he was wearing a Seattle Seahawks jersey.
Yes.
You
Go
know,
Hawks.
I don't know. And my mom loved football, and so she just struck it off with him. And the funny part of the story is that when my parents were driving back to the hotel that night, Gary was out on a walk with his then current girlfriend.
Yeah.
And my mom just said a little prayer in her heart, Lord, it would be so nice if Molly could meet a nice young man like that someday to marry. And there you have it. So,
Power
but
of prayer.
yeah, first meeting Gary, I mean, I guess I can't remember like a first reaction
Yeah.
other than just fun and
Yeah.
happy and easy to be around. Yeah,
Right. Yeah. Did he make you feel comfortable or?
definitely. Yes.
Yeah. So you could hide, maybe a little bit, you could hide behind his outgoingness, kind of almost like you could tuck yourself in behind that and not have to.
I can guarantee you when I first met him that I certainly didn't think that, but it
Okay.
was probably a subconscious thing that was
Yeah.
there.
Right.
But I certainly wasn't aware enough to think that.
Yeah. That's awesome. Anyway, and so now you've been married 32 years and that's amazing feat in itself in today's world and in the life of marriage and relationships and I'm just so incredibly honored that you came on the show and that we can talk about this because I just think it's so important to really bring things out in the light. I think a lot of times people tend to want to kind of hide or hide their what they perceive as their struggles, right? And yet if we bring them out into the open, I've had Sandy on the show, my wife, as a guest, and just having her on here, I had so much feedback from people just seeing, hey, you guys are real people with real, we'd banter back and forth and it was refreshing for people. So I just think it's really important to have this conversation. So let me ask you just from uh, just right out of the gate here, how can a neurotypical couple relate to the conversation today? So what are some things that, maybe people aren't neurodiverse, what could they take away from what we're going to talk about today? Any thoughts on that?
If they're not a neurodiverse couple, I just think everybody has things in their life that they struggle with. I think
Right.
everyone has questions. I think they have fears, they have insecurities. And it doesn't matter if you're neurotypical, you're neurodiverse. I think
Yeah.
everyone has that. And so if you are both just neurotypical couple, I would definitely hone in and listen because those other spaces in your life that you're hurting or you have insecurity, you're bitter, there is something for you there as well.
Yeah, and
Totally.
I would say that in every relationship there are differences, and
Yeah.
there are degrees of intensity in those differences and the number of them. But we all have differences as couples, and so we
Yeah.
have in our relationship we have many differences,
Mhm.
and they are a part of our everyday life. And so sometimes when we think that when we struggle with differences, it means that we're not compatible or that those are bad things or wrong
Right.
things, or maybe we've chosen the wrong partner. But in reality, those differences are there to make us stronger, and they're there for us to actually they enable us to have even deeper and more significant conversations to connect with one another.
Wow.
So it's a matter of differences, and everyone has got differences in their
Yeah.
relationships.
Yeah. In fact, those differences are an invitation to go deeper into your own thinking, your own way of thinking, your own life, right? Like, so they're actually an invitation to go deeper in relationship with somebody. And I think a lot of times you hit it right on the head, both of you. I think sometimes people just think that because there's differences or we can't agree on something or we don't see something the same way that, we're not getting along or that we shouldn't be together. And that's just not true. I think that it's an invitation to dig in and actually go deeper. So give us a picture of what are some of those challenges for you both? What have some challenges been, particularly if you can think back to when you first started dating, first married, what were some of those challenges that this uh, neurodiversity created, or even just doesn't even matter if it's neurodiversity. What were some of the differences, the way you think that brought some challenges to you both?
Yeah. The interesting part with this question is that there's such a fine line with autism spectrum disorder and personality. I'm
Right.
actually really fascinated by all of it, but I think that autism side of me, I am everything. The world is black and white to me
Right.
in every way. Like it's like I don't know how to see the gray. And yeah, and I think that is played a big part as far as communication. It plays a big part just in everyday life, like having fun and
Right.
activities and things that we would do. I see that pretty early on in our relationship.
Yeah, and what it looked like for me was that there was such differences socially, because when you're in the midst of a, let's say, a home or an apartment or your living space, everybody has quirks, right? Everybody wants the toilet paper a certain way, flap up or flap down. You complain about the toilet, so you have all these little different idiosyncrasies within the home, but socially, that was when I noticed that there was something very different. And me being an extrovert and her being an introvert, we always just chalked things up to we're just very different in that way. But
Right.
we didn't really see the autism pieces in all of that, or at least I didn't. And I don't think you did either at first. We were just, the first few years of marriage is like a flash for most of us.
Yeah.
But that was a really interesting piece that I think we overlooked and that we missed. And so
Right.
a lot of those traits that are autistic sort of got, like you said, you sort of hide behind other reasons for why we do each of these things. And so
Right.
so that was just kind of like, oh, okay, we're really different. Like, it's not just social settings, it's not
Yeah.
just in our personal life, in our home. They're everywhere. And so it just took us a while, I think, to sort of connect dots. And it just takes a while, and it takes education, because if you don't have a context to think about things, if you don't have a prior knowledge of what
Right.
if we were to sort of group all of our differences together, and like Molly said, some of them are personality, some are the mood that we're in, some of them are how we handle parenting, and I mean there's just all these
Yeah.
natural differences, but connecting the autism piece was much more challenging and difficult.
Yeah.
Right.
And one thing to add to that, prior to really understanding about autism in my life, I don't know any other way to say it. It's not going to sound really nice, but I always just felt lower than Gary. Like he was on a higher plane than me,
Oh,
but it wasn't degrading.
right.
He wasn't lording it over me or making me feel bad. I just knew that I just couldn't go to his level and connect with him. It was like I was in kindergarten and he was
Wow.
in a master's program in college. And I had to live with that. And
Wow.
we talked about it. I brought it up to him, and he was always graceful
Wow.
about it. But I think right there, like that's frustrating on my side
Yeah.
and it's frustrating on his side. And
Sure.
what do
I
you
could
do
see
about it?
that. Yeah.
And I feel like autism was really kind of that you're just like that aha moment, like, ah, okay. It's not that I'm in kindergarten and he's a master's program. It's just how we are so different. We are wired so differently, and our
R-
neurology is so different.
Right. But the other thing is you were probably in the master's program and other ways of thinking, and he was at the kindergarten. Like, I had a thought though. I was going to ask you that black and white and the way you process. Did that mean like you took him literally all the time? Like when he would say something, you would take it as literal, like he would, like, okay, if he's, let's say he's thinking out loud and he says, yeah, we should go to the, to the keg sometime. Would you have heard that as, hey, I'm taking you to the keg? And then when he didn't, it would create a division or a problem?
Well, if it was taking me somewhere, it would probably create a relief if he said we weren't going because
Yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't want to go anyways. But yeah, that's pretty safe to say. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say so, because
So interesting.
yeah, a lot of I have to be careful how I talk, because if I think about something and I'm just verbalizing it and I'm thinking out loud, she's taking it literally.
Right.
And so we literally have to adjust our communication on a daily basis, because there's a lot of things that I might say that'll be misconstrued. And so I have to adjust my language so that she can
Wow.
believe what I'm saying and she can take it seriously. And so we just have to be careful. Like if
Right.
it's not that Molly can't be playful or read innuendos, it's just that she has to be in the right space, right? And it has to be like, okay, now we're going to have fun. Like now we're just going to joke around, you know? And so it's that literal part. And that's quite a common, when you say that's like a common trait among people with Asperger's, is that they're very literal black and white people. And they don't really, they have a harder time catching on to innuendos or, you know, between the lines kind of speak, or sarcasm. You know, those very difficult.
And the funny thing about that is that we just don't like it.
Mm.
We just don't like it. It just seems so trite, and like, just say what you want to say. Like, don't make a comment that I'm supposed to try and figure out and then do the thing you want me to do. Like, you just say you want it. Like, why are you hinting? Just say it.
But this has been the source of a lot of our challenges in our marriage, though.
Sure.
Is that, you know, let's say my feelings are hurt by something that she said. And then, you know, I'm dropping hints along the way that my feelings are hurt. And if she doesn't pick up on my hints, which is very difficult for people with Asperger's, and then and now I'm just like, well, she doesn't care. Like, she obviously doesn't care about me, or she doesn't care about what I have to say, or she's indifferent to something that is really important to me. And so we both really have to work hard at communication. And that's maybe been, I would say, one of the biggest things in our relationship is we have to mean what we say and say what we mean. And to assume that the other person knows what we're thinking is like, that is a mistake for us. Like that's a mistake for most couples, you know, but for us, it's magnified.
Yeah, but I'm going to just say this, that this last few minutes is exactly what I coach couples of any neuro, whatever. Like, be clear, say what you need to say, like use I language, and be very clear in your communication. So the fact that because of the neurodiversity, you have to do that even more, I would say that every couple should do that more. I think you're actually giving us a fantastic principle, you know, and so my question is, so did that hurt trust then? Because, you know, in my book, the trust pillar is the cornerstone pillar of a relationship, of a healthy foundation, and communication is the second pillar. So we're talking about, if you're, Gary, you mentioned, it was very interesting that, you know, if you were, you know, moping or hinting that you've been hurt, but you didn't come out and say it, Molly couldn't deal with it because she didn't know. Did that breach the trust pillar for both of you, and how?
I wouldn't say so for me.
Yeah.
I think it would be just more maybe frustrating, maybe just like, well, he's not really saying anything, so I guess he's just okay, or he's just having a bad day.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting because she didn't know how to read me, she would assume that things were either okay or I didn't want to talk about it. And so that was a huge barrier in our relationship, because it's like being married for 20 years, let's say, and let's say you go for pizza every week and you order the same thing. And then then you go to pizza the next week and you say, hey, I'm going to go to the bathroom. Would you just order the pizza for me? And your spouse says, well, I don't know what you want. You're like, how could you not know that? Like, how could you not, you know?
Yeah.
We've been married for 20 plus years. And yet at the same time, because Molly respects what I have to say in the moment, that she'll be like, well, you didn't tell me that's what you wanted. And I'm like, well, shouldn't you know that? You know, and it goes back to what you're saying, Mark, is like, yeah, it's really awkward for most couples, including us, to be able to literally say what you want and what you need. And the degree of vulnerability that requires is really painful sometimes.
Right.
And that's a fascinating comment, because would you say that's true for me?
No, it's true for me, but not necessarily for Molly.
Yeah. So what would it be for you, Molly?
I just say, if I need something or I want it, I just ask.
Right.
And if I can't have it right then, and I probably will get it later, but I'll just ask. And if I'm not asking for something, it's because in that moment it doesn't feel safe to me, or I just think, you know, that's probably not going to happen. But in my relationship with Gary, I can't actually think of something that I wouldn't ask him for if I
Right.
needed
Right.
it. I just can't. I would just ask. And it is so foreign and so odd to me why people just don't do that. I don't get that.
Because
Gary.
there's emotive, sensitive people like me in the world
Yeah.
who, like, you know, I get offended when someone doesn't notice something about me, right? So,
Yeah.
so I have to fight off the offense
Yeah. So,
oftentimes.
so what does affect you, Molly, then? What would frustrate you or upset you in a given situation or in a communication with Gary?
And it's hard for me to answer that off the top of my head.
Okay.
The first thing that comes to my mind, though, is that I think I rarely get frustrated or upset. I am much more inclined to get hurt.
Okay. So let's
And
use the word hurt then.
being hurt is it a lot of times it's because I don't understand. And I'm
Yeah.
aware that I don't understand. And that the longer we've been married and the more things have been uncovered, and the more it's just this never ending thing of, will I ever get it? Will I ever understand? Did I do it right this time? Did I do it
Right.
wrong this time? Am I making him happy? And I
Mm,
think hurt is what surfaces because nobody, if you truly love someone, you don't ever intentionally want to hurt them.
of course. Yeah.
That's not in my heart to do that, but yet I know I am
Right.
because I'm not reading him or picking up on this, or maybe I'm just asking him too many questions. I'm so concerned about doing it the right way for him
Right.
that I'm checking in. Maybe I'm just checking in too much. The
That's
overthinking
interesting.
is part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I think a lot of couples go through that. And if we can come to the place of transparency and emotional intimacy, I would say, transparency is intimacy, which is into me, you see. So when you do see each other clearly, it builds a type of trust that you can kind of trust the motives even when they're off in a given day. But if it's difficult for you to read that, then I could see where that could be frustrating. Like, because you do love Gary, because you do want to make him happy, um, it would be tough to be guessing his emotional state and not wanting to contribute to the negative
Yeah.
part of it.
A really interesting, if this is a random comment, but it kind of ties in
Yeah,
here, is that I am not a people pleaser. I
right.
don't know where that fits in all of this, but I am not a people pleaser. I really do not care what people think of me. I just don't care. As I've gotten older, I'm a little better about it, but I'm just like, if you're not okay with me, that's
Good.
okay, because I'm
I,
okay with me.
yeah, that's
However,
fantastic.
when it comes to my husband, when it comes to Gary,
Ah,
I very, very, very much care. He's the
mm,
only person walking the planet that I actually really care and want to please. And that's what makes what we're talking about really hard
right.
and painful, because if I don't know how to do it or what to do, or if I have to constantly ask questions, which I
Mm,
know frustrates him, then I'm just kind of landlocked. Where do I
right.
go with
But if he knows, Gary, if you know that the reason she's asking you those questions is because it's her way of caring for you and to dig in to make sure that you're okay, does that soften the blow of that at all, or is it like still, does it still trigger you?
Well, it certainly was triggering and hurtful earlier on in my marriage, and even in the recent past, that has still been an issue, and
Right.
it's still been hurtful because it's like, man, like, wow, like I'm trying so hard, and then she is too. It's just that I get my feelings hurt by things, and she's not intentionally trying to hurt my feelings. But that issue of trust that you brought up is so important
Yeah.
because we both trust each other at the very core of our relationship,
Yeah.
that we don't want to hurt each other. And one of the best things about fighting with Molly is that we know that we have good intentions for each other, and we're always pretty quick to say, I know your intentions are good for me,
Right.
so and for our relationship. So that makes it a lot easier, but it's still, I think it takes, like, there's a difference between, let's say, honesty and transparency. Honest, you can not be very transparent, but still be honest. But transparency is like, it's like there's a depth perception. There's like, you can see a lot and you can see through a lot to see how something really is.
Yeah.
And so being vulnerable to me is being very transparent. And so being vulnerable for me has been challenging, because I'm like, why do I have to ask? This feels so awkward to have to ask for this or ask for that. And yet Molly needs that. And she's not about to guess or to take a risk or to take that chance. She's not about to do that, but she does want to please me and do everything that she can. But that trust factor that you talk about, like it being a pillar in a relationship,
Yeah.
that if that's compromised and has cracks in that pillar, that's where a lot of the relationship building has to like repair. Like what you don't repair, you repeat. And so if you're not going to deal with those cracks in that trust, then, and ultimately it comes down to, I think it comes down to, well, who are you for? Like if I'm going to say I'm going to put my wife's needs ahead of my own, then that better be true. And in a lot of marriages today, that's not true. It's either 50-50, or it's like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. It's got to be mutually beneficial. Marriage is not a mutually beneficial thing. This is like, no, it's got to be totally beneficial for her.
100, not 50.
Yeah, it's got to be 100.
Yeah.
And so I think in a neurodiverse relationship, that part can be challenging, because I can feel like I'm the one constantly adjusting.
So actually then what you're saying is, you could serve Molly and help her by being transparent, by telling her what your needs are very clearly and directly. And so instead of it being about you, it actually becomes about her, which makes it easier to do. Because
it has to be.
Because I know I have a needing to be met here, but I love my wife and I want her to meet that need, because then she feels good, right? Then she feels like she's contributing to serving me and helping me, because that was a strong statement you said, Molly. I wish I heard more wives and husbands say it with such conviction that, this is the only man, this is the only person in the world that I want to please. That's a level of love and trust that shows 32 years of marriage and the ups and downs that come with it. So I just really honor both of you. That's a very powerful statement. I think listeners need to, and watchers need to hear today, is that we give 100. We give ourselves completely to one another. And that's what makes our relationship healthy. I often say assumption's the enemy of faith. If you want to have faith in someone, don't assume, ask. Be curious, ask questions, right? And I think that's such a powerful statement you both just made. So speaking of faith, I know you're both people of faith because you met in Bible school. And so how has your faith intersected with all of this? I'm very curious, even from your point of view, Molly, how faith intersects with your neurodiversity and Asperger's particularly. Does it help you, or did you have to overcome some things with it, or did you just have an experience with God that was so powerful that there's just no question, and it seems like when you get something, you really grab a hold of it and just run with it?
Yeah, that's going to be hard for me to not go on and talk about. I think about, I never did a formal diagnosis with Asperger, but I did meet with a gal one time. And Asperger is no longer in the DSM. So it's just, everything's just an autism spectrum now. But when Asperger was out there in the DSM, one of the clarifying things about it was that people with this, or who are like this, have an area of special interest that they'll just keep talking about and, whatever. And when I met with this gal, just the one time, she was not a believer, just downtown Seattle, she said, "This is clearly you. I wasn't sure if you were on the spectrum when I first met you, but it's clearly you. And your area of special interest is your love relationship with God."
Wow.
And I was like, yep, that's true.
Yeah. So that special interest means fixating on it. it's an obsession almost, or like this is something nobody's going to take away from me, whatever that is going to be. And also in my experience with people with Asperger's, they are very smart in those areas. They have a high level of intelligence, what they apply that special interest to. And so that makes sense to me, because you have committed your life fully to
Mhm.
following and growing spiritual formation. Like we heard in the bio, it's not just a matter of church going. It's like, this isn't a sport for you. This is your life. So
Yeah, I
tell me
have,
how.
like I said, I have so much that I could say, but
Yeah,
another thing that you touched on that Gary had written in our bio that I would love to bring up and talk about is earlier this year, I started to have this thought specifically towards Gary and I in our relationship, but then it quickly branched out to any relationship that I
yeah,
have. And that is finding the gospel in relationship.
yeah,
And when I think of Gary and myself, I see Gary, the gospel part, where he is like God, Father God, and I am like the whole rest of the world of his creation. And I really play this out in my mind with him. And it's going to be hard for me to pick all these little different parts of it out. But when
yeah,
I think about Gary, like when you think of God, he loves us so much, and he just wants to be in relationship,
yeah,
and he will go to any extent to be in that relationship with us. And then you think about us, his created, like we are just all over the place. We don't understand his ways. We can't possibly completely understand his holiness, his
mm,
sovereignty, like all of it. We
right,
just can't. We're needy. We need God, and God
right,
wants us. And I see that in my relationship with Gary, and it's not out of balance. It might sound like it is, like I'm elevating
yeah,
my husband and saying he's like God, but I see invitation in it.
right,
There's an invitation for Gary. There is a there is an aspect of God that I believe Gary can sense and see that I can't, because
right,
Gary wants something in a
mm,
relationship with me that I just can't give to him. And that's
mm,
honestly, it's heartbreaking. There is a space in our relationship that will just never be fulfilled for Gary. I'm just going to say it. It's true.
wow,
And isn't that true with God?
wow,
And do
wow,
we ever stop and think about how God feels that way? We talk so much how God
wow.
loves us and he forgives us and he saves us. And
Mm,
it's all true, but God, he has feelings. There's strong feelings, and
right,
he wants us. And I see that played out in Gary,
wow,
and that invitation for him to know that heart, that part of God.
right,
And for me, being more like the representing of the world and just seeing that lostness, and like how amazing it is to have a rescuer, a redeemer. Like how amazing that I have a spouse. The reason we're still married for all 32 years really is Gary, because he could have just said at some point, I can't do this. Like
yeah,
I love her and I want to, and I'm faithful and committed, but this is ridiculous. I can't keep go on this way. I can't have this empty space forever in my relationship. But
mm,
he didn't give up. And that's just like God.
right.
That's just exactly what God does for us. So I can keep going on and on about it, but
Yeah,
I'm gonna
but
stop and either like Gary say something or you say something.
you triggered a couple of thoughts in me. One is, God created us for relationship, because he is
Mhm.
a relational. If he is love, wants relationship. So I believe that he created us for relationship. So that desire is hardwired into who we are. But of course, a lot of hurts and things in life come in the way of that and get in the way of that. And so it's interesting, because I've often said, well, we need to see a God in each other. We need to see God, and that's what you're really saying there. The parts of Gary that reflect God in a way that you don't see them is what blesses you. And then I would say it's vice versa. I think the parts that you have captured of God's heart have that Gary sees is what's kept him in 32 years, and the same for you, right? It took both of you, by the way. It's not just him. You had to have a lot of grace for his emotional shenanigans, um, that you didn't understand. But I just think that that's a beautiful picture for marriage. When, you know, when you talk about that three-strand rope holding us together, the closer we get to God and who He is, the closer we are to each other, the harder it is to distinguish the difference because we're so entwined in His love. And I just love that, Molly. That was a beautiful, beautiful picture that you gave us there. And I think that it speaks to that spiritual intelligence you have. You know, I often, we talk about intelligence and we talk about emotional intelligence. I talk a lot about relational intelligence, but there's also spiritual intelligence. And I think that you brought that out beautifully that way. And so I just want to commend you and honor you on that. And to tell the listeners and to highlight that is that we need to see God's creation in each other. We need to see His love in each other. We need to see the best in each other. And when we do that, it builds that trust pillar. It builds a communication pillar, the authenticity pillar, honesty pillar, and honor. You know, we're going to treat each other differently when we see each other that way. So thanks, Molly. Gary, what do you want to chime in on this? I thought that was so full what you put.
Yeah, and just as much as she feels like I'm responsible for being, being the glue in our relationship, even though we know that's God, but she, in the same way, it's been the same for me. Like she has been, reflecting the heart of God to me. And so just when I don't deserve mercy or I don't deserve grace, that she's so quick to be able to offer it. But the other thought I have is that I think not only do we trust each other, but we do like exclusively trust God with the fact that this person is in my life to shape and mold and form me more into the person of Jesus Christ.
Right.
Because it was interesting. I was doing a podcast in Las Vegas recently, and I was getting a ride to the airport, and the gal that I was doing the podcast with said, we were talking about marriage, and she had asked how long I had been married, and I said 32 years, and she said, how do you stay married that long? Like, are you kidding me? Like, that person can't possibly meet all your needs. And I'm like, I truly believe with all of my heart that my wife is not designed to meet every one of my needs. There are some needs that only God can fulfill. And are we okay with sometimes our spouse doesn't meet our needs fully? And we can get sort of, big chested about that and puffy about that and say, well, I deserve better, or I don't deserve to have to go through this situation or whatever. I just think that Molly's strengths are there for me to learn and grow from. And I'm convinced that the person I am today would never be, not that I'm anywhere special, but the person I am today is largely because of Molly and she has shaped and formed me, or God has used her to shape and form me into more like Jesus. And so those moments where I'm frustrated or angry that she's not all I want her to be or wish for her to be, those things are uniquely designed for me to go to God and say, God, would you fill this void in my life? It doesn't mean that I need a new wife. It means that I need a new perspective.
Yes. That's so good. It is so good because it is so true, right? Like nobody can fulfill all our needs. Only God can. But the interesting thing is, how does He do it? Well, He does it by putting people in our lives, like our spouses. Sandy and I met in a bar and we had an addictive lifestyle the first few years, and yet I can wholeheartedly and completely convinced that God brought us together for such a time. It took a few years for us to even know Him, to have a revelation of Him. But I can see on hindsight how He set that up and how He's used it now we've been married 40 years. And
wow.
You can see how He's used it to invest in others and to help others. But, it's the same thing for me. Sandy has introduced me to a faithfulness level of prayer that I would never have been able to walk in on my own. And we're just so different in our approach to everything. And she's black and white too, by the way, Molly. But it's helped me and it's taught me how to be a better man and a better person all the way around. But I always say God gets the glory, but I honor my wife for helping in that. That's what I'm hearing from you two.
Yeah. I mean, it's so easy to think that your spouse is the one holding you back.
It's
right?
easy for you to think that. That
Well,
thought has never entered my mind.
and that's fair. That's fair. But from my
But
perception,
many,
anyway.
but I will say many men have
Mm,
accused wives of doing that, of holding them back. And so this isn't just, this is a man problem. It's not just a,
exactly. Exactly. And so, but when we can change our not just our perspective, but our perception. So perspective and perception are different, right? Perspective is putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. Perception, though, is the way that you view life. And so we sometimes get perspective mixed up. We don't understand what perspective is. But if I can change my perception that my wife is a gift to me, no matter how different or how difficult that communication or that can be, when I view her as and I perceive her as a gift to me, and that God handpicked her for me, that changes not just my perspective, it changes my perception of
yes,
everything. Every way that I view life is different. And
sure.
so a lot of the challenges that Asperger's brings in our relationship, or a neurodiverse, or major differences in a relationship, they're really meant to shape and form and mold us, to chip away the tough and sharp edges, and to make us if I find that if I am growing in the fruit of the spirit, love, patience, joy, peace, if I'm growing in those things, even through difficult challenges in my marriage, those are good and healthy moments. We just don't typically view them because they're painful.
Yeah. 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 Boy, that little section there was so good, you guys. What are some of the strengths to having Asperger's, do you think, Molly and Gary? Like, what are the strengths that come from it? Because I don't like when we always look at things as a negative. I think that you were, whatever the cause was, that it's a gift to you, and it can be used as a gift if you perceive it that way. You can use it. What are some strengths that you see uh, that this has given you? I mean, I can think of a couple that you've already said, but maybe just highlight what you think.
Well, a practical fun one is two of them, I guess, would be details, being honed into details, and memory. Yeah, how many times have I let Gary know a date or a name?
Yeah,
That's been very helpful to him. Yeah, but back to the spiritual aspect, I think one thing for me that it's taken me a while to really learn this, but I am literally attached to the heart of God.
right.
And the older I get and more conversations I have with my wonderful husband, I realize that it's unique. It's
Mm,
different. To me, it's not. To me, everybody, if you say you're a Christian, then you just must think the same way I do when it
right.
comes to God. But I think that is a unique part and a strength, whatever, however you want to define that we're about the tunnel vision or, limited,
I,
knowledge or
I see it.
whatever.
I see it as a blessing. I see it as an ability to attach to someone like that is incredible, or a truth, or
Well,
or whatever. I think that's amazing.
the funny part of this is, do you know what it's like to live with someone who's like,
It's
always talking about God, always holding me to this high standard? Like, I'm like, you have
Yeah.
any idea? But it's fun.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that, Gary. Like, obviously it inspires you, but you bring up a good point. It can also make you feel like less than. You can make you feel like now she's the master and you're the
Mhm.
gardener. So, how have you dealt with that? How have you been able to take the inspiration and use it to your benefit? And how have you let go of of the insecurity?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting, we can choose to accept things, and there's a level of maturity in accepting things, but there's also a challenge to live up to things.
Right.
And so it's been hard for me to accept oftentimes the person that Molly is, especially in our past. It's been very, very challenging.
Right.
But in the last little while, this last phase of our marriage, it's been really great to kind of live up to it. It's like, oh my gosh, like the standard is so high that how can I live up to this, and how can I grow and be better because of it? And so a lot of my mentality is, is, Lord, this seems like an impossible standard that Molly has for me. I'll never forget, we were in Eston College. We were dating at the time, and we're downstairs in the laundry room, and we're both doing laundry. I don't even think we were dating. And we were just chatting, and we were talking about, I don't know, guys and dating and whatever. And she said to me, I want to marry someone who will love God more than he'll ever love me. And I just remembered that. I was like, okay, I don't hear too many women talking like that. Like that was just like note to self. And I think that along the way, that high standard that Molly had for the person that she married is the same high standard that she has for me right now. So it does put pressure on me. It does. But you know what? That pressure makes me better.
Yeah.
And I don't always live up to it. And you know what's always great to have a wife that has grace for me, and she most certainly does and communicates that grace to me on a regular basis. But it instead of just saying, wow, that's really you, and I got to accept that, I've chosen to say, wow, how can I make that, or how
Right.
can I let that make me better?
Well,
And how do I need to adjust in order to do that?
yeah, but also I think the way you perceive God and the way you experience him has also been inspiring to her. So it's just different. It's not the same. And so you can learn from each other in that sense, right?
Mhm.
Let's go into like just a bit. I think would be amiss if we didn't quite do this, but let's just go into a little bit of the elite mindset, uh, you know, thinking here. How has been married to Molly made you a better man?
Hmm.
And how have you taken those things like we've just talked about and then applied them so that you can actually um, perform at a level in husbandry? People don't like to talk that way, but I really believe that husbandry is a skill that we can actually develop. And I think wifery is the same. We need to develop our skills as husbands in loving our wives, in loving our kids. We as fathers, we can develop those skills. I really believe that. I believe we can use an elite mindset to get our hearts aligned to the right place. So that's why I'm asking you that question.
Yeah, boy, there's a lot of things I could say, but I would probably let this thought rise to the surface, and that is that I truly believe in whole life excellence.
Right.
And that, in my own business, I've identified 9 different areas. I call them domains of our life that we can be excellent at. And there's a lot of people in life that rise to the let's say the the top of the mountain. They're known for something, or they're famous for something, but you look at other areas of their life and they're a mess. And
Right.
I could
Yeah.
look at Kobe Bryant, I could look at Michael Jordan, I could look at, you
Sure.
name the person, I can find domains of their life that absolutely fell apart. Most of them have a marriage and family that fell apart.
Right.
And so I think, if I'm going to mess up or if I'm not going to be the best I can possibly be at all sorts of things, there's one thing that I really do need to, after my relationship with God, need to put in its rightful place, and that is marriage and my relationship with Molly.
Yeah.
Even before my kids come, they're below Molly on the list of priorities. And so when it comes to having an elite mindset, I think maybe it drives Molly nuts a little bit, because I'm the one that's, sort of driving us always to be better, and Molly's the one that's always accepting where we are. But when we put those things together, it's a really powerful combination,
Right.
because now we have an acceptance for one another, but we are sort of driving, or encouraging each other. It's maybe the best word, to be the best that we can be in our marriage. We're not settling for mediocrity ever.
Yeah, but you bring up a really good point with the domains. I think, I've recently discovered some language that I didn't use before. We used to talk a lot about time management, prioritizing your marriage, wife, kids. We talked about this idea of God, family, ministry. And I've actually come to realize it's actually not time management, it's energy management.
Mm.
If I put all of my energy into one domain, then I don't have any left for the other domains. And so I need to make sure that I prioritize my energy, not just my time. Because for years, I was always out and always doing things and ministering to everyone else but my own family. And I had to figure out the hard way that I needed to actually start putting some energy into uh, into my family and so they didn't get the last of me dragging my sorry butt into the house and had no, just like laying on the couch. They actually got the best of me. And so that was a real learning for me. So that's, I think, what you're saying there, Gary, that's so powerful is that, we want to bring excellence to every area of our life. And so maybe it makes some hard choices. Maybe we do need to let go or lessen the energy in certain areas so that we can actually perform better in others.
Mhm. Yeah, I think of them as boundaries. Like the
Yeah,
Bible says that the Lord sets our boundaries.
right.
And so if the Lord, if he allows me to excel in one area, it needs to be because of him. It needs to not be because of my effort. And
Right.
so I've sort of just kind of settled into that sweet spot in my relationship with God and say, God, if you want to do and accomplish other things or more things through me, then it's going to have to be a work that you do, but it's never going to be at the sacrifice of my calling in life. It's never going to be at the sacrifice of my marriage. It's never going to be the sacrifice of these things. They would just have to be things that God does additionally on top of my responsibilities that I feel that I owe him. So that's one way that I think I work it out in my
Oh,
mind.
and nor would he ask us to in that sense. People use different Bible stories, but they miss the context of those stories. But, yeah.
Yeah, I do think of them as boundaries, and I do think if God wants to expand them, then it has to be him. It can't be me.
Yeah, he can increase our capacity
Yeah.
as we can if we come into agreement and, do those things. Molly, any thoughts on what we just talked about? You haven't said anything for a while. Is there anything that jumped out at you?
I don't really have a lot of thoughts about that. I think it's just interesting to me with what Gary is currently doing in his life with business and a career that it is pretty far off from where I would be, meaning thinking about having an elite mindset and the way you think and performance and all that. Wouldn't you agree, Gary? Help me here. It's a little
Well, I think,
foreign for me.
yeah, I do. While I think it's foreign, but I think both of us find the complete joy of continuing to shepherd people and for us to be living out our calling. I mean, we talked for an hour yesterday on our date talking about shepherding people, and
Right.
and sometimes we're shepherding sheep, sometimes we're shepherding goats. They don't, it's we don't always get to choose who Lord places in our life,
Right.
but we are just loving continuing to shepherd people. And so being a pastor for 28 years, I honestly don't feel like I've skipped a beat.
Right.
I literally do not, because I feel like we together are empowering people, we're shepherding people, we're bringing the best out of people. And yeah, maybe the assignment or the context has changed a little bit, but it's really not that different. We're still reflecting the heart of God. We're still shepherding people. We're still loving people, introducing people to Christ, nurturing people, and healing and binding up the brokenhearted. I mean, we're just still doing that.
Yeah, and thank you for catching me with that question and helping, because I think it really does feel that I'm more of a church person. Like, keep me my circle small,
Yeah.
keep me with the Christians, and I think that it's okay. But Gary, he is much more widespread, and he's more of an evangelist and just be out in the world. And I love that. Like, I know trying to tie it in with the elite mindset part of it is that in context of what you just said, it does feel like I still get to be a part of what he's doing. I might not understand it. I
Right.
might not value it the way that a lot of other people do, but in the end, it's just about living your life for God and
Yeah.
following him, being who you are
Yeah.
for God and sharing that with people.
Right.
And that part of it, I can completely jump on board, because
Yeah.
I've recently got to start traveling with him. And not that I go to him with his clients, or I don't really get to hear him speak that often, but I just know that he's impacting people's lives, or he'll say, this person, you can just pray about this situation. And so getting to be drawn in with that part of it, even if I don't like totally dial into elite mindset and
Yeah.
all that kind of performance and stuff like that, I definitely dial in to people being drawn closer to the heart of God.
Right.
So if I'm working with a client, I know Molly's praying for them.
Yeah.
They don't even know that, but Molly is behind the scenes, just literally changing from a spiritual standpoint, literally literally sending angels on our behalf in advance and ahead of time to give messages, to give understanding, to give wisdom. Just like in Daniel, it talks about that when we humble ourselves, that God sends angels to help us understand, or sends angels in advance ahead of us to do things. And so having Molly a part of that, and her willingness, and not even willingness, her eagerness to be a part of that is just really a lot.
May I say something else about that?
Yeah.
I think one of the hard things for someone that's in my situation, especially married to someone who is just a strong individual, a strong leader. It's, you mentioned earlier in our conversation of when I first met Gary, and I could kind of hide behind him, and there is some truth to that in this particular situation, where I feel like there's so much inside of me. I have so much of God, so much of his love to share, but because of how I'm wired and how I'm made, it's very difficult for me to know that the how to get it out there, to how to connect with people. It's very hard for me. And look who God gave me for a spouse, a husband, a partner in life, for his kingdom.
Master connector. Yeah. That's amazing when you think about it, right? Like you're two puzzle pieces that look completely different, but you fit perfectly together. And I think that's the beauty of God's plans.
Yeah, we'll often say, like, we get there so differently, but we have the same destination.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so true. And I hope listeners please hear what was just said by Molly. Like that is the picture. Sometimes we think because there's differences, or we don't look alike or think alike, that somehow that means we shouldn't be together. And that's couldn't be further from the truth. You're actually better together, because what you do have to find is the pieces that fit. My positives need to fit in their negatives and so on. So Sandy and I are nowhere near the same people, but boy, together we're a formidable force. And we have and I'm so glad, I'm so happy that she's on this journey with me, and I feel the same thing from you guys. And I think that is the beautiful picture here. So whatever it is that causes difference, like whether it's neurodiversity or whether it's mental health, whether it's just opinions, find that connection point and always connect, and nurture the connection, because everything else will flow out of that. You guys, you're amazing. You're amazing. Thank you so much for doing this. I want to give you a last chance here. Anything come to mind just for tips, a takeaway, maybe something that somebody could take literally. I mean, there's so much here. I hope people listen to it several times, because there's so many little nuggets that you can mine for in the things that you've said. Is there anything like specifically you'd like to say to the listeners about neurodiversity, or about marriage, just about getting along? I want to give you one last opportunity here just to say what's in your heart.
Yeah, I would say to anybody who's listening to this, wherever you're at, whatever your hurt or your struggle, and however impossible the situation is, I would just speak hope.
Right.
May what Gary and I have shared today, may there be hope. You don't have to relate to everything that we've shared or understand all of it. It's one of the lessons I've learned in life. That's okay, but you can have hope.
Yeah.
May you just have hope in that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's really good. Yeah. I would say for me, I'm maybe a little bit more technical. The last few years for us have been quite challenging, and we've been through a lot. And so I would say, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, but I would say that we put in over 1,000 hours in over a year just on our relationship alone, and mostly one-on-one, and 1,000 hours in a year. Now do the math. That's like a part-time job, right? Like, it's pretty crazy. And I'm not exaggerating. I'm actually being conservative. And so I think when I hear couples talk about, how much work they're putting into their relationship and that it's falling apart, I'm just saying, yeah, well, when you reach 300 hours, let me know.
Yeah.
You know, when you reach 500 hours, let me know. When you reach 700 hours, let me know. Because the value of our relationship, there's so much riding on it, not just for, you know, not just for our family and for our kids and for our grandkids and for the life that we built together. It is so much bigger than that. And because of its high value and high worth, it's worth the work that we put into it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, put as much work into your relationship, no matter how old you are, no matter how different you are, no matter how far apart or close you are. It's if you value your marriage, work hard on it.
Yeah. So good. So good. And that's the other thing, you know, we didn't get into, you just don't have time. And also it's your own personal life and involves other people around you. But, you know, I don't want anybody here to think that, you know, this is all rosy posy. You guys have gone through some really deep waters. And but you've given us how you got through those things today, and that's the key for your takeaways for my listeners and for those that are checking this video or audio out. Is the takeaway here is that just know that Molly and Gary have been through a lot of deep waters, and it was all the things they talked about today that got them through those deep waters, especially their faith in God, especially their desire to put him and each other first. And that is the key. That's the empowerment of this conversation. Is that's the takeaway, is that put the time in, it's worth it. Put the time in. It is so worth it. Learn each other, understand each other, help. I always tell people you got to teach people how to love you. Teach each other how to love each other, and you can get so much further. And it's so worth the fight. By the way, a lot less energy to put in investment into that 1,000 hours than it would be to divorce and have to start all over with somebody new, divorce, start over with somebody, and all of the complexities that come with that. So just want to encourage you today that here's a couple of people that 32 years have proven that you can have an increasingly better marriage as time goes on, and a rich life together. And I just want to thank both of you for your transparency today. This is not necessarily easy to talk about. Every empowering conversation I have on this podcast is also hard, you know, tough subjects. Because it's not empowering if it's just about fluff. So we've talked about some real things today, and we've talked about some real struggles, but also real solutions. So I hope you can take that away. Gary and Molly, thank you so much for investing in my listeners, investing in my orbit. I really appreciate it. I've got some takeaways today for myself and for Sandy. And so we really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.